I do want to share a little bit with you about my Sabbath rest that's coming up. And that might sound kind of boring, but I think it will be adventurous for me, and I think you might find some interest in this as well, especially as it relates to this lock it in, let it go idea, right? So we're going to lock in adventure. That's what we want to do in our lives. That's the biblical example that we've been given. And we want to let go of fear. That's also the biblical example that we've been given. We all know wilderness in our lives. Whether or not it's in the woods or very personal, we know what that's like. So my Sabbath rest. Well, first of all, let me tell you a little bit about what Sabbath rest is. Now, I'm really lucky that this congregation and our denomination, and most denominations, really provide for what's called a Sabbath rest, which is every 7 years, good biblical number going off of some of our biblical examples of letting land lie fallow to rest and rejuvenate. So every 7 years, pastors are given the opportunity to take about 2 months away from the congregation. And the idea is that you have the opportunity as a pastor to really take a break, to slow down, to reflect, and to look forward. And so, like I said a little earlier in the announcements, this is actually the second time that I've had the opportunity to do this here at E-Town Church of the Brethren. The first time, many of you will remember, was 7 years ago. My family and I, thanks to a very generous grant that we were awarded from the Eli Lilly Foundation, I was able to take my whole family back to Brazil, where Karen and I had lived. Not just Karen and I, but our daughter Ellen was only 3 months old when we left. She spent her toddler years there. Julia was actually born there. And for Kai, it was an opportunity to introduce the country to him for the first time. We went back, we explored the country. It was an adventure too, I'll tell you. We explored the country, we reconnected with old church friends while we were there, and it was just wonderful. Pastor Pam had the opportunity to go to Nigeria just a few years ago. It'd be nice if you did that, huh? A few years ago. And Pastor Josh had the opportunity to take some Sabbath rest time as well a couple of years ago. So this is really something that the E-Town Church has embraced. And I think that the church, we as a congregation, have discovered when we allow our pastors this opportunity to rest, we come back more rejuvenated and more refreshed than ever. And so Jason, I'm sure Jason's already making his plans now for what he's going to do for his what do you got, 2 years coming, huh? Yeah. Jason will be able to, three, okay, you got 3 years, and then he'll be able to take his Sabbath rest. Well, for me, going into this one, what I really want to focus on is that theme of adventure. And so I'm going to be taking trips via backpack, out into the woods. I'm going to try to get as remote as I can. I've often told people that if I would have been planning this in non-COVID times, I would be doing this in Alaska or in the Argentinian Patagonia or something like that, trying to get as remote as I can. But alas, COVID and the times that we're in, I'm going to try to get as remote as I can around here, maybe as far north as New York State and the Adirondacks, maybe into Virginia, and some places around where I can really test myself. Because believe it or not, and this is one of the things that I want to emphasize to you today as I think about it for my Sabbath rest. One of the things that I want to do is I want to get uncomfortable. And I know that sounds really odd, because we spend most of our lives trying to get as comfortable as possible, right? We try to pick just the right chair, just the right couch, so that we can create a comfortable home environment. We want to be as physically comfortable as we can. We want to be as financially comfortable as we can, don't we? We also want to be as relationally comfortable as we can. But here's the thing. When we're always preoccupied with being comfortable, well, do we really create any opportunity for growth? I was thinking, if I try to make myself as physically comfortable as possible all the time, what happens to my body? Well, I kind of become a lump. If I try to make myself as financially comfortable as I can all the time, well, then I become a Scrooge. If I try to make myself as relationally comfortable as at all times, well, then I'm not going to talk about that issue that might be a little uncomfortable that maybe really needs to be talked about. And so one of my favorite quotes along these lines comes from, he's an ultramarathoner, kind of a crazy guy. So, bear that in mind. His name's Dean Karnazes. He says that we've equated comfort with happiness, and now we've become so comfortable that we're miserable. I'm going to say that again. We've equated comfort with happiness, and now we've become so comfortable that we're miserable. We've got it all mixed up just because of the abilities that we have today in this 21st century. So I'm going to try to make myself uncomfortable. And you know what, Pam? If I think back to your Sabbath rest, I'm guessing Nigeria was not always comfortable. But boy, it was worth it, wasn't it? When we lived in Brazil, it was the same thing. Not always comfortable. But it's not just putting ourselves in a foreign situation. It's putting ourselves out there. You know, our anti-racism group right now has moved from studying books to really looking at what they need to do relationally in society and maybe even in their families to have difficult conversations about anti-racism, about racial justice. Those are uncomfortable conversations that they are intentionally walking into. Why? Because when we get uncomfortable, we create opportunities for growth. When we get uncomfortable, we create opportunities for growth. So that's a big part of what I'm going to be trying to do on my Sabbath rest. I was thinking about this, and I was thinking about being uncomfortable. I was thinking about being in wilderness situations, and I was thinking about that in the context of the Bible. Any idea how many times the Bible mentions the word wilderness? The concordance I looked in, 287 times the Bible mentions wilderness. And that's from beginning to end. Wilderness has all kinds of connotations in the Bible. A lot of times this is a big, bad, scary place that people didn't want to be. But check out the number of times when God's people went into the wilderness and amazing things happened. I'm going to come back to that slide in just a minute. John the Baptist, he lived in the wilderness. What'd they say? He wore a camel belt, leather camel belt. He wore animal skins. He ate locusts and honey. This is what he did. This is where his ministry was formed. And he didn't do all this and then come back to the town and tell people all about it. They actually came out to him to be baptized in the river. Now, I promised Karen that I will not come off of my Sabbath rest looking like that. Okay, Jesus was, I love the scripture here. In the New Revised Standard Version, it's the version that we usually use here, it says Jesus was led by the Spirit into the wilderness. Some versions say he was driven by the Spirit into the wilderness. And what happened? He faced deprivation, right? Food and water. But he also came to great clarity, even as he faced temptation, about what his life and what his ministry would be. He went back and he hit the ground running. Next, Hagar and Ishmael. This is an often overlooked biblical passage, especially for those of us in the Christian tradition. This is a story from the Hebrew Bible, and it is an ugly story. I'm not going to try to dress it up. This is a story from one of our patriarchs in our religious tradition, Abraham. He and his wife Sarah were not having children, and so they took Hagar as a slave, and they forced her into relations with him so that he could bear a son, so that he could have an heir, only to have Sarah bear a son later. And what happened? Hagar and Ishmael got banished to the wilderness. It's an ugly story, but once there, they seized the opportunity. They used their wit and their grit to form another way. They made it work. They made a way out of no way, as our sisters and brothers in the African American tradition often say. Now, the Israelites, they wandered, said 40 years, right? They were wandering around in the desert trying to find where to go. In the wilderness, there was a lot of mumbling and grumbling from the people along the way. The leaders often felt like they didn't know what they were doing. But in the end, they found the promised land. In the end, they came together as a people. And the last one I want to point to today is the prophet Elijah, saying some hard truths back at home to the degree to which the powers that be were after him, chasing him, wanted to nab him, throw him in jail, execute him. So he ran into the wilderness, and it was there that he experienced God's still small voice. So when we go into the wilderness, these amazing things can happen. Well, speaking of amazing things, I'm going to go back to one of those slides. Whoop, went back too far. This is a picture of somewhere in southern Utah. About 20 years ago, my brother and my friend Steve and I we were on an extensive backpacking trip across southern Utah. And one evening we sat down, and just like Jason and I were doing a little earlier in the children's time, we sat down and we were sort of resting our legs and huddled around, started getting ready to make a fire. And we said, you know what, before we build a fire, let's do this. It's a beautiful night. The sky is just we see the sky opening up, it's crystal clear. We were down, picture us down kind of toward the bottom of this picture here, and you can maybe even see a valley beyond those rocks in the front. And we said, you know what, if we were to hike up on those rocks, we would have an amazing view of the stars, 360 degrees of stars. And so we made the little trek. It was about a 10-minute hike up. We hiked up to the top. We soaked it all in. It was beautiful. It was one of those beautiful, memorable moments when you're just with friends and you feel closer to God than ever and you're seeing amazing things happening. And then we decided, hey, this has been good enough, so let's hike down. Well, I said it was about a 10-minute hike up, right? We got to about the 12-minute mark going down, and we realized, you know, Steve, I feel like we made a wrong turn back there somewhere. To which my brother chimes in, I feel like we made a wrong turn 3 turns ago. Well, we were lost. Didn't have anything other than a couple of flashlights, no shelter. It was starting to get cold. The wind was starting to pick up, and we didn't know where we were. Talk about being uncomfortable. We were starting to look at one another saying, which one of us is the biggest that we can cuddle up next to get a little warmth tonight? But then actually, once we got out of that moment of fear and that moment of panic, then we started to think. And so you know what we did? We actually climbed back up on the nearest rock, and we looked around because we realized from where we were sitting before, we knew from there relationally where our campsite was and relationally where the trail was coming in. And then we did this. We said, you know what? We've been looking at the stars for the last hour and a half. We can reorient ourselves with the stars. And so we did that. Talk about being uncomfortable, but leading to growth. That's exactly what we did. And so that's exactly what we need to do in our lives. Now, I want to think for a minute here about the wildernesses in our lives. I want to think about the wildernesses that we all have faced or even face right now. What do you think when you think about wilderness in your life? I think about loss. When you lose somebody that's important to you, it could be death, it could be distance. When you have to reorient your life. I think about illness. I think about fractured relationships. You know what? I think about our nation right now. We are in a wilderness as a country. We have never been anywhere like this before as a country, and we're not doing so hot with how we're treating one another on the way. And incidentally, the same can be said about our denomination right now. In a wilderness of sorts. We don't know which way to go, and we're sort of coming apart at the seams. Thankfully, that's not the story here in this congregation, and I hope that's not the story in many of your congregations wherever you're at. But it's a wilderness. I think about the wildernesses that we're all facing because of COVID. Working from home, schooling from home, people who have to now live with their abusers at home, new wilderness moments that aren't always easy, certainly uncomfortable, and beyond. So what do we do with those wilderness moments? Well, there's a couple of things that I want to remind us of. A couple of things that those biblical stories have taught us about being in the wilderness. And the first is this: no matter where we're at, geographically, emotionally, spiritually, God is with us. God never lets us down. God is always there right next to us, even when it may not feel like it. No matter the wilderness, God is there with us. We can also think about the ways in which we must find a way with God. I think about Hagar and Ishmael. I think about them being cast out into the desert, into the wilderness. It says that the scripture basically says they learned to live off the land. They used their wit and their grit to make a way where there literally was no way. We learn that we can do it. I think about one of the things we learn from those biblical stories is how resilient we are as God's very own, as people created in the image of God. We are resilient people. I spend a few times a year, I do resilience trainings. And I often do them with Brethren volunteer service workers. These are mostly people in their late teens, early 20s. People who sometimes aren't quite sure that they can do it. They're going into this wilderness of, I don't know what's coming up. I'm going out to serve, but I don't know where and with whom. And what they learn is that they have way more resilience than they ever imagined. And it's not just people in that stage of life. We see that with people at all stages of life when faced with these wilderness moments. God is always with us. We can make a way where there's no way. We are resilient people. The last thing I want to talk about today is fears and how we can face our fear, because let's face it, that's often what holds us back. It's what holds us back in all the areas of our life, whether it's relationally, whether it's career-wise, whether it's our relationship with God, whether it's how we're going to work together, again, how we're going to work together as a denomination, as a country. We are a very fearful country right now. All you have to do is look at the sales of guns and ammo to know how scared we are of one another. How do we face our fears? How do we face that fear? It might not be somebody worried about going on the chipmunk trail versus the grizzly trail. It's okay to be afraid. The question becomes, what are we going to do with that fear? What are we going to do when we acknowledge that we are scared? Are we going to run from that? Are we going to head into it? Are we going to think about it, pray about it, plan for it? What are we going to do with that fear? So one of the things that I'm going to be doing during my Sabbath rest is putting myself in situations where I might feel a little afraid. When you're out in the woods by yourself, when you know that I don't think anything will happen, but an accident could happen, right? When you think about what it is just to be alone with yourself for days at a time, with no distraction, with nothing to preoccupy you other than yourself and God, I got to admit, that's a little scary. It's been a long time since I've done something like that. So I'm going to be out there and I'm going to be asking myself hard questions too. Questions that I don't want to be afraid to ask. Questions about who I am as a husband, who I am as a father, who I am as a pastor, who I am as a citizen. I'm not going to be afraid to ask those questions. We need to look into those fearful places in our lives. So I want to share one last story with you before we wrap up here, and it's about fear. My goodness, 20 years ago probably, maybe a little more, Karen and I this is when we were dating. We were getting pretty serious in our dating life, and we were into camping and backpacking. Now, this was before we had kids, so we had the opportunity to do that. And we decided we're going to go to Alaska, kind of the final frontier when you think about some of these ultimate backpacking experiences. And so we hiked and we backpacked all around Alaska. And on our journeys, we saw all kinds of cool stuff. And in fact, we're talking about trails and grizzly trails, and we actually had come across a number of black bears in our hikes. Seemed like they were all over the place, and we got really good at it. Black bears, you just say, "Whoa, bear, it's okay, bear. This trail's yours, bear. No worries, I'm not doing anything." And usually they just amble off. They don't care about you, or sometimes they're even afraid of you and they take off. And so we had hiked, and we were getting pretty experienced. But the pinnacle event for us was going to be some days backpacking in Denali National Park. Now, Denali is a massive amount of land. It's got Mount McKinley, or Denali as the First Nations people call it, and we were so excited for this. But here's the deal. When you backpack in Denali, there's no trails because they don't want that kind of human impact on the land. There's no trails, but here's the other thing, bears. And when you go to Denali and you apply for your backpacking permit, you fill out all these papers, and then they literally sit you down and you are forced to watch this 30-minute video. I have no idea what the name of it was, but they might as well have called it 150 Ways That a Bear Can Kill You. And they showed you how big and powerful these animals are, that they can run as fast as a horse, that they weigh more than 1,000 pounds, that a little flick of their paw can kill you instantly, and their heads are enormous. Talk about jaw strength. And so I think what they're doing there at the ranger station is trying to get you to choose to do something else. Well, I swallowed hard, and we said, okay, we're gonna do this. And it was intimidating. So the way it works is you get on this bus, and it's an old school bus basically, and they take you up this dirt road. The dirt road goes for 100 miles through the park, and you can just tell the driver you want to get off wherever. You just tap them on the shoulder, say, "Hey, we want to get off here." And so that's what we did. But before we did, along the way, we saw several grizzlies minding their own business, doing their thing, eating berries. But I felt like in a school bus, when they raised up and they were sitting on their haunches, they were looking at me eye to eye. And I thought, oh my goodness, what happens when we see one of these out of the bus? Well, we get out, we're walking around, and we pitch our tent. And you know what? The whole time we were out hiking, we didn't see a single grizzly. But what did happen was, as we were in our tent, there was one day in particular, the wind was whipping so hard across the tundra. If our bodies had not been in the tent would have blown for 40 miles probably. And it was snowing on us. This was late August. And so we faced our fears, and we had a wonderful experience. I want to flash forward, though. Don't show the screen just yet, guys. We'll save people from looking at all these other things. I'm going to flash forward just a few days after that. You know what that fear did for me? What that fear did for me was clarify that there was nobody in life who I wanted to be next to other than this woman. And that right here at this spot, this was at a mountain pass, we stopped and we had a little something to eat. And Karen says that she has never seen me more afraid than in the moments leading up to this moment, where this was just after I'd asked Karen to marry me, and she said, "Are you serious?" And then she said, "Yes." That's a story for another time. But we face our fears, and we grow. When we face our fears, it creates the terrain for growth. It creates the opportunity for something new. Wherever you're at right now in your life, no matter whether it's just the COVID stuff that has put you in a wilderness, maybe it's a relationship that's difficult, maybe it's grieving the loss of somebody, maybe it's just that you're afraid for our country right now. How will you face that fear? How will we face that fear? Please think about that, because we can do it. And we remember that God is always with us. We remember that we are more resilient than we often give ourselves credit for. To sum up, I want to again say thank you. I want to say thank you to this congregation, Elizabethtown. I want to say thank you to all of you out there who are part of our virtual congregation for, I know, your prayerful support. is and will be strong during this time. I want to again thank my colleagues here at E-Town Church of the Brethren, Pam and Josh and Jason, and our tech folks, our front office, our board who has encouraged me, our human resources committee who has encouraged me to take this time to refresh myself, to rejuvenate myself. Thank you very much. And I presume, just like last time, when I come back, I can't wait to continue our ministry together, through thick and through thin, no matter what happens. Thank you all. I love you very much.